Adam, thank you so much for joining me for episode 1 of The Casual Scholars, which I have titled The Casual Scholars, a podcast featuring interesting people who know a lot about interesting things. How are you? How's it going? Who are you? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Adam Hinkle. I am an actor and filmmaker here in Chicago. More an actor than a filmmaker these days, but a filmmaker nonetheless. I'm also a parent to two twin daughters who are awesome and sassy in every way. And yeah, just trying to, figure out what the next step is for me in my career as I, look for auditions and future roles and collaborators and stuff. So it's I've actually quite a charmed existence right
Yeah,
now. So yeah, it's kind of me in a nutshell.
that's awesome. And we have known each other for, I was thinking about this earlier, at least 10 years, right? Like, wouldn't that have been like 2012, 2013 ish,
Maybe ish, yeah. I might have.
tangentially?
Yeah, probably tangentially. I definitely have known Spencer about since maybe about 2011, 2012, because we
Yeah.
worked at Groupon together on the same season.
Yeah. That's a name
So
I haven't heard in a while,
I,
Groupon.
I know it's crazy.
Wow.
I know I just dated myself, but yeah, he and I were working together at Groupon, and then I think it wasn't too long after he worked there that I think he started Broken Nose,
Mm.
and I actually had my own theater company at the time as well, and it was just kind of interesting, kind of like seeing like just discovering like what your coworkers' side hustles are,
Yes.
and a lot of them are artists anyway, so or actors, so it's kind of interesting seeing what other people are up to. So it was really kind of really cool to see his company just like from the very beginnings, and then just see it just grow into this like behemoth
Yeah.
that it was, and just produce some of the awesome work that they did. So I definitely had probably met you through him at some point. I
Mm.
can't pinpoint where, but it was at least 2016 that
Yeah.
brought you into audition for a role when I discovered you were an actor as well. Which, by the way, I just have to tell your audience how awesome you were in that audition.
You and I have much different memories of how that evening went, but I will say, like, you were super nice and everybody was super nice there. Like, I don't remember anybody treating me like I did a bad job, but I do remember having a minor existential crisis after that audition, wondering what I was doing with my life.
Just really unfortunate. And I'm so sorry about that. I should have sent you a note to be like, hey, we went this other direction with this part, but you were like flipping fantastic. I'm sorry it took me like eight and a half years to tell you that.
I actually brought you onto this recording to ask you how it went and to pick your brain. This was all just a ruse to get you here to see how that went.
Oh man, wow.
But no. As we were talking before we were on the record, it's experiences like that that helped me become the tortured comedian that I spent 16 years being. So I wouldn't be nearly as funny if everything worked out. Probably. I don't know.
Well,
I'm just gonna tell myself that.
I'm kind of happy about that, but kind of a little ashamed at the same time. So, I mean, multiple things can be true at the same time, I guess.
Right. Exactly. So, how did you first discover that acting was something that you were interested in? Do you remember how old you were when you first kind of clicked?
Yeah, it was, well, at least it started when I was 11 years old. My father brought
Wow.
home a video camera, like this little like Sony mini camcorder that he brought home ostensibly just to film like family movies and stuff like that, just family events. And my twin brother Brian and I, and to some degree my older brother Mark, we just co-opted this camera and just started making our own little like movies with them. And it was just like, they were just like easily rip-offs of like whatever big studio movies there were at the time. We made like fun, like comedies, horror movies, like thrillers and stuff. And then as time went on, we started like really getting into it and really enjoying it. My brother Brian and I specifically, and we really tried hard to make like our own like original movies, which again were not that original. They're still just kind of knockoffs of like major Hollywood movies then. But we really got into it and really tried to make them really good. Like we took the craft of filmmaking really seriously, and then the love of acting kind of came out of that. I think once we started making movies, I would say maybe that same year we started doing school plays in elementary school, and then we still kept on making these movies well into middle school and even high school. And while we were in middle school, we started doing more theater. Our parents were actually awesome and had found this broadcasting art school about 45 minutes away from where we
Wow.
lived. Yeah, they enrolled us in it. It's basically, it was this program called Cinekid that taught kids the craft of like of filming a TV show, and they filmed this public access television show.
What?
Yeah, it was really, really cool. So they had kids that worked behind the scenes and also kids who did on camera acting work. So you can get sort of an education like how to what it's like to make a TV show. So we were really lucky we got to do that for a couple of years,
Yeah.
then moved on to doing theater in high school, which we actually had to stop going to the broadcasting art school at that point because they both were just in just a schedule
Right.
mismatch at that point, because we could either do high school theater, which was really intense and it was a real time commitment, or we could do the syndicate, and we decided to go with theater because it was also just a little bit easier to be like at school as opposed to like driving 40 minutes, 45 minutes once a week. And so we had gotten cast in relatively like smaller roles while we were in high school and stuff, but it just turned into this real passion. Like we took it really seriously, really like thought of myself as like like really wanted to be like an intense like young actor, because at that point when I was in high school I was really into Edward Norton. He had a couple of roles that just like blew me away as a young actor when I was.
Edward Norton had a chokehold on millennials, I feel like, when we were about that age. That man did something for everybody. I don't know what it was, but I
Yeah.
had the same thing.
It was very, I'm your typical millennial, I guess. But yeah, I was just like, I thought that his performance in Primal Fear and his performance in American History X, like those two, like, just like bookended. I just was, he was so just so scary in both of those performances and just so like convincing that I was like, this is just something like I have not seen before. So he was
Yeah.
really he was really the benchmark for me in terms of like what I think an actor should be. So,
Yeah.
so
Do you
yeah,
remember which part or which role in high school was your favorite or stuck out to you as like the best you'd done or memorable for any reason?
I didn't really have a favorite role in high school because mostly I got cast in like chorus parts and stuff. So they were like usually like really tiny. It wasn't until my senior year that I had actually I had worked on a couple of monologues. One from this play called Marvin's Room by Scott McPherson, and this other one from this play called Equus by Peter Schaffer.
Yeah.
And so I had like these two contrasting monologues that I brought to our state conference and ended up, I think, doing pretty well at, and then it brought them to an international thespian conference and ended up, was able to perform on the main stage at this conference because of them, and won like a scholarship as a result. And
Whoa.
that, I actually have really fond memories of doing that work because that really, um, I think like doing those monologues really showed me that I was like, okay, I think I can do this. And even my theater teacher at the time, she was like, look, you're a really talented actor. You just, weren't right for a lot of these other, big parts. And because I can't sing, I'm just so automatically
Same.
that limits me
Same.
100%. So, and I don't think in her eyes I was right for any of these other like larger roles in school, but she was like, you're still a really talented actor, you have a lot of potential. And so that I kind of like really held on to as I finished high school. So that was probably my favorite theater experience in high school, was just working on these two monologues that I just felt like really, I think they kind of showed me that I have the capacity to be versatile, and that I can do this, because there were times,
Yeah.
as you're a growing artist, you or like when you're, young and you're starting out, you don't really know if you're any good. So
Right. 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 And I think something that's unique about the arts, and maybe it's not unique about the arts, but in my experience it's been unique in terms of like acting, writing, dancing, singing, comedy, is there's the time when you're passionate about it, and then there's that breakthrough moment where you're good at it, and those don't always line up. They don't. It's rare. I can't think of one example of a person who started out as good at it when they were first passionate about it. And I wonder if maybe your teacher or the person who taught theater at your school, I wonder if maybe she saw that, where like something was holding you back. You were like, you had the drive, you had the ability, you had the skill, but maybe something, a mental block, maybe some kind of, we tend to set goalposts for ourselves, and if we haven't met that goalpost, we continue to tell ourselves we're not as good as whoever, when in reality that's our goalpost. We set that, we can move that goalpost back as often as we want. And so I wonder if maybe it was one of those like, oh, he just needs that little push, he just needs that push or that thing or that part or that whatever it is to finally break that seal and show us what we all know is already there for him.
I think you're probably right. I actually was looking through a bunch of old report cards recently, and I found some from high school. And I remember one of the comments that she left on my report card, it might have been from like either sophomore or junior year, was I think something to the effect of, like I wasn't applying myself, or I wasn't, like realizing my full potential, like something in that realm. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that I think it took me a little bit of time, but once I found the right material, and I really worked hard at it. Like my
Yeah.
senior
Oh
year,
yeah.
it just, my grades kind of suffered a little bit as I was kind of finishing my junior year, and I kind of made this resolve that I really want to just, I want to push myself a lot more senior year. I don't want to be
Yes.
messing around. I need to kind of keep my grades up, to get into college. And I also was just really, really focused artistically. Like I just really had a drive that year. And I think the combination of just me finding the right material and having the will to want to do better,
Yes.
I think the both of those were, I think that's what really like flipped the switch for me.
Yeah. And I also think when we're young, we have the energy and we have the drive, but we don't necessarily always direct it in the right way. So we're going, going, going. We're crazy passionate about it, but we're not really channeling that feeling, or we don't really know what direction to channel it in. So it's just kind of all over the place. And
Mhm.
then one day, whether it's maturity, whether it's practice, whether it's
Wow.
skill, whether it's advice, it kind of figures out where it needs to go, and then all of that energy is channeled in the right direction, and it's the most beneficial, and then man, you just take off like a rocket after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really what did it. And I was just really lucky. And it's funny, that summer that I had performed these monologues at this international festival, there was a chaperone there who was actually a former student who we became really close with. And he actually taught me how to do a Scottish accent. Like, he
Really?
was just like talking in the Scottish brogue the whole time. And I just like picked up a few things. And if it wasn't uh, for that actor who was there with us as our chaperone, I wouldn't have gotten cast in my first play in college, because we were doing a production of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing. And one of the parts that I auditioned for was the role of this actor named Billy, who was actually, uh, he was supposed to be playing the role of this like Scottish, like I think it was like a Scottish revolutionary named Brodie, and it required a Scottish dialect. So it's funny that like that whole experience also just kind of like really gave me a good like foot in the door when I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my freshman year. So that it was actually kind of fortuitous for kind of a couple of reasons, actually. So
Interesting. That's really, the way that I learned how to do a Scottish accent is from Chicken Run. So,
oh,
however you get there, as long as you end up there at the end, that's
yeah,
what matters.
I completely agree. I feel like whatever you got to do to get there, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so you got a scholarship from the Thespian Conference. You went to school and you studied theater when you were in school, right? That was like
yeah,
your degree field.
yeah, I was like super super focused, which I actually really, looking back, I'm very fortunate, because I feel like there are a lot of young people that go into
Yes.
college and not knowing where it is they want to go.
Yes.
And it's really 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 fortunate that I like knew what I wanted to do early on, and I just went for it in college. Like I stuck
Yes.
with theater. I graduated with a BA in theater arts, and I'm just glad that I didn't kind of like putz around and mess around and just like see, and try out a bunch of things, because it's also really expensive too. Because a lot of
Yes.
these experiences at schools, you realize that, like, yeah, they want you to take your time, figure out what it is you want, but by the time you do figure it out, sometimes you need to have a certain amount of credits to graduate with a certain major, and sometimes you have to spend extra time at school. So I was just really lucky that I came in and I was just like, no nonsense from the get-go. It's just like, no, I'm doing this. That's the direction that I want. Like, how do I get there?
Yes, and you don't, because I was the same way. I knew day going in, and it never wavered, never questioned it. And you don't realize how lucky you are to have that experience until you meet a bunch of people who are lost, or they still don't know yet, or they came to college still waffling, or they change their degree halfway through, or they drop and then they come back at a later time. So that's awesome. Yeah. And you don't realize until you're in it, a blessing and an advantage that is, to just know exactly what you want to do. Did your brother also study theater?
Yeah. Yeah, he was also a theater major at school. So it's like he and I were very lucky. There are points where we both got cast, and this happened when we were in high school too. Like, some of the roles that we got cast in were very very twin oriented, just taking advantage of the fact that we were twins, because you don't really see that very often. So
Yeah.
he did. He and I both graduated as theater majors. He had a little bit more fun than I did at certain times. He was also in a fraternity while he was at school. And so he just had this like push and pull between like school and fraternity and theater. Whereas I was just like, I'm just going straight theater. This is like my path. And so I was lucky that I got cast in a, what they called I think it was a workshop production in my freshman year, which I don't think happened very often, but yeah. And then the following semester I got cast in, I don't know if I got cast. I think I got cast in the following semester. I think I actually used that opportunity to work a crew role to satisfy some credit requirements for school. But and then the start of my freshman year, I think I auditioned, but then I elected to do a semi-professional show outside of school, because it was like a really, really good role in this. It was a play called The Subject Was Roses, which was based on, I think there was actually a film version that was made of it with Martin Sheen in the part that I was playing as a young man. And it was just like a really good role about this young man that comes home from the war, but he has a really like fraught relationship with his father. And I just was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to get an opportunity to do a role like that at school. I'm just going to do this. And then the following spring, I got to do Shakespeare, and then I got to also like study abroad in my
Cool.
junior year. Like, it was just, I was really, really fortunate that I had that opportunity to do as much theater as I had done and to travel abroad, because my parents were actually really, really supportive of me going into theater, which it honestly says a lot, because there weren't a lot of members of my family that pursued anything artistically inclined. Like, I
Yeah.
come from a family of people with insurance backgrounds,
Right.
so I think they were fine with my brother and I like doing theater. They were just like, you just got to try to find a way to make money at it, which is like the most impossible thing ever.
Right.
But I would say, despite them probably not loving us going in that direction, they were 100% supportive. And I honestly feel like they did us such a huge solid. I feel like if it
Right.
was them trying to go into the arts, I don't think it would have turned out well for them, just in terms of what their parents' expectations had for them. So
Mm,
feel very I feel very fortunate
yeah.
that my parents were as supportive as they were, because I just don't know if that would have if they would have had the same kind of backing and the same kind of support as I did.
Absolutely. And the longer you're involved in the arts, the more you meet people whose families weren't supportive. And it's like it's such a foreign idea and experience to have had very supportive families, and to have never been told you can't do it. You can do it. You'll have to work hard. You'll have to compete. You'll have to, like, I remember when we moved to Chicago, my mom said, just be ready to be a small fish in a big pond. And as long as you're ready for that, you can work your way up. You can work really hard, and I know you've got it. But then to meet people that are involved in the arts with you, who like aren't even on speaking terms with their family, because their family is just like so disappointed in the fact that they went into the arts, or they make fun of them, or they roast them, or whatever. They won't support them in any way. yeah, you're absolutely right. It makes the experience just so much easier, even on that level. And I think it's something that you don't truly understand. Like, you appreciate it in the moment, but you really appreciate it once you get to a certain point in life, and you're like, man, it like I don't know what I would have done without them at least just backing me up in front of everybody, you know?
Yeah, agreed. And I'm sure they got shit for it from from certain family members. Like, I think I know anecdotally they did, but they were just sort of like, no, this is, we might not be 100% in the bag for it, but this is what they want to do, and we just want to support them all the way. And
Right.
I wonder if it's also because, like, growing up, like, we didn't really express a whole lot of interest in stuff. Like, I played sports, but I wasn't really good at sports. And like, I played soccer, and I remember like the coach had to make up a position for my brother and I because we couldn't remember any of the other positions on the field. He called it Wolfman. He's like, and so we would get
Wolfman.
so excited. We would get so excited. We'd be like, "Hey, coach, can we play Wolfman?" And he was like, "Yeah, hey, you can play Wolfman." Like, that's how
Wolfman.
bad we were. Yeah, that's
That's
how bad we were at sports.
I will say that you raise a good point. It helps when you're also good at it. It helps when, like, I can't imagine what it's like to try and get family support when you just are just shit at something, when you're just real bad at it and there's no redeeming. Because, like, trust me, I've done things like that. I've been involved in things like that where it just did not stick. But I'm glad that that's not the hill I tried to die on. It was something else. And that was just a dabble moment for me. So yeah, that is a good point. It does help that you're good at it, you're dedicated to it, you work really hard, and also they see the end result is not awful.
Yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah, it was. It was just like, so I knew that, sports weren't really going to be in my future, but as soon as like the acting came along and the filmmaking, that was the first time they actually saw us really take a real interest in something and just like go for it, like at 100 miles an hour. So I think that as parents, that being the first time that they actually saw a genuine interest in something, they wanted to nurture that. And so it just, again, I'm very, very lucky because I think that speaks a lot to their characters and how much they
Absolutely.
really truly loved us as parents, even if they didn't fully understand what we were doing at the time. So I give them all the credit in the world for, me doing what I'm doing today and having the confidence to go through with it because they were supportive from day one. Even I remember sitting in our living room and my parents would watch these movies that my brother and I made. And would remember, like, we thought a movie was a hit when they got like the most laughs. And my parents would sit there howling at some of the shit that we filmed. And it was just like, so I think they legit enjoyed some of it too. I think they probably,
Yeah.
and I was always jealous of my brother, Brian, too. I think because he had like, just from very early on, he didn't have any filter whatsoever. Like, he would legit just stand like right in front of a camera and just like he would make what he called the Brian Hinkle show. And he would just talk at the camera for just like forever. Like, he would talk into it for like a half an hour, just like, just saying crazy things, playing, certain characters. And I thought he definitely had a lot of presence as a kid. And I didn't really think my stuff was really as good as his. Like, he was just such a quick wit. He was just like my dad. My dad was a real quick wit, and Brian was too. And so I always like tried to compete with him to try to make like movies and stuff like better than he did. So I think my parents seeing all that were I think that's really what caused them to be like, oh, they, let's see how far they want to go with this.
Interesting. And do you think there was anything about you that Brian felt competitive about, like that he watched you do and be like, oh, I can do that better, or I can be serious like that, or I can be whatever? What do you think he would say?
You know, yeah, there was, I think as we got older, that definitely was a dynamic that I think when I started really taking things like really seriously and having like certain levels of success when I was in high school with like our thespian conferences, I think there were moments that he has mentioned like, oh, I was kind of like jealous of you here, or I thought you were a better actor here. And I was just sort of like, no, man, I like for the longest time, I just felt like you were like my biggest competition. And so, I think we kind of had this little bit of a, back and forth where there are certain aspects of what he did that I was jealous of and certain things that I did that he was jealous of. But I guess at the end of the day, as something that we kind of figure out as we get older, it's like we all are unique. That's like the best thing about it, is that like nobody can do what you can do better than you.
Right.
So, but that's kind of that takes a lot. It takes a
Yeah.
lot of it takes a lot of learning to get there.
Yeah, yeah, especially when it's like a sibling that you're talking about. But man, there's also that moment where you watch them do the thing they're so good at, and you're just like, so I remember the very first time my brother told me he was directing a show, and I was like, because I'd only ever seen him act. I was like, is this going to be the thing I have to be polite about? Like, what is this? How's this going to go? Like, I don't know. Oh, what? Oh, I don't know. And even like sitting in the greenhouse theater, like with the lights going down, I was like, I don't know, because I'd never seen him direct anything before. And man, I remember watching that first show and being like, oh, I'm never going to see him act again. This is going to be what he does forever. And I don't think I've seen him act again. If I'm thinking about it, maybe once after that, but like the moments where you're like, oh, this is like I'm watching this person become the person they were meant to be on like a cellular level, and this is really cool. Your brain knows when history has been made for this person, or when like a core memory has been made for this person. And so that's really cool. But there are definitely those moments growing up where you're like, well, I can do that just as good as they can. And you're not 100% sure if that's true or not. You're like, but I can try. I can give it my best. That's for sure.
But that's what I think is so cool about you and him, is that like you both are like really awesome in your own
Thanks.
rights. Like, I just think like, it's like, man, I would love to meet your mom someday. Cause I was like, man, I just want to shake her hand. Cause just like the sheer amount of talent that both of you embody, and just like the directions that both of you have gone, are just so like fascinating, and just kind of diametrically opposed to each other in a certain way.
Yeah.
But it's just so kind of crazy seeing like how you both have thrived in, but just in sort of like different shades of,
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah, and it goes back to that whole, when your parent supports you. I remember when I was growing up, there was no such thing as not going to each other's stuff. Like, I was in dance at the time. Like, Spencer came to my dance recitals. I went to Spencer's plays. There wasn't even an idea of not supporting each other. It was, when are you going? Which one are you going to? Like, which night are we going? And I think that was huge. I also think it helped a lot that we were different enough that I never feel like I've ever competed with him. Even when we were both in competitive events, literally competing with one another, it was like, if we get first and second, we've both won, kind of thing. And I think that helps a lot when you're raised in this environment where family supports family. Family is there. Like, I will fist fight somebody in a parking lot for my brother. I would do it. I would probably apologize to the person afterward, but I would do it because that's what you do. And then when you, and again, once you watch your sibling do that thing that they just really love doing, like, I know for sure, I know, because his face, as much time as he spent acting, he can't hide his true emotions. I know there have been times where he's like, what the hell is she doing? Like, what is she doing? I'm going to clap. I'm going to clap. I'm going to clap. But then, like, stick with me. It went somewhere. I'm like, just trust me, trust my vision, and it'll go somewhere. So I know, like, he was at my wedding and he met a bunch of people from my podcast that, like, I met them because they were guests on my podcast. And he's like, this is the weirdest group of people I've ever met, but they're all really interesting. I don't know what's going on here, but we're all having fun. Like, we're all bonding over this one shared experience. But I think I said all that to say, I think it goes back to the support network that you have. Because if you don't have that support network, I think that healthy competition between your brother would have become maybe real competition. Maybe it would have felt more scarce, the opportunities and the success. And that might have gone a different way than having parents who show you that there's enough to go around for both of you.
Yeah, it could have been super toxic. I completely agree. But I never once, looking back, like, it didn't feel that way. It felt like,
No,
kind of like, maybe like healthy envy, jealousy. It was never anything that my parents had ever like played
no.
by any means. Like, they were equally supportive of the both of us. It's just like, I just had this feeling, just in the work that I did. I'm just like, he just had this natural ability to improvise that I did not have as a young person. I don't think I put the words to it at the time, or the feelings, but I could just feel like he had something more.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yes.
that really, like, I think that kind of helped in both of us. Like, because I think when one of us does well, like the other one will do well. It's kind of like what my
Yeah.
friends years ago told us. So I think that's kind of true. I think that when one of us really like pushes and succeeds, I think that like that really engenders a little bit of like, well, fuck, I'm gonna go do that too.
Yeah. And then when you try it and it is really hard, you have so much more respect for the fact that your sibling makes it look so easy. Like, I tried directing one thing one time and it was just never again, never again for me, because it was just such an undertaking of mass proportions that I could not fathom how my brother like just dives into this and just makes it look like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, he had to do a stand-up show once where he performed my material on stage and he was like, that was the worst thing I've ever done. I never want to do that ever again in my life. Like, good for you. You do great. And so what you see it and you're proud of them, and then if you ever try it and it doesn't go as well for you as it does for them, instead of thinking, like screw them or whatever, you think, wow, I whatever they're doing is working great for them and they are crushing it at this.
And that's got to make you feel a little good though, because it's like, you know, like that's, and I will say stand up is one of the hardest things that you can do as a performer.
See,
Like just like I shit you not.
acting acting is one of the hardest things.
Yeah.
And I mean that positively. Like, I don't even mean don't try acting. I just mean like the hardest thing I've ever done is had to be somebody that I was not,
And
in my
that's,
opinion.
I can understand that because as a stand up, you're bringing yourself to it. So I can, and that's kind of a struggle that I have with acting sometimes too. It's just like there are certain roles where that have been like a challenge where it's like, fuck, I got to find something about this character that I can really anchor into because
Mm.
I just want to keep my judgment at the door and really try to find something that it, you know, so yeah, there are aspects of that are hard, but man, I will say, it's just like I give you a lot of props with stand up. I really do. So it's kind of nice that like both of you kind of have your own lane that you work like really, really hard at, and the other one kind of like struggled a little bit in a way. You know, it's not
Yes.
anything you really wish on the other one by any means, but
No.
it's gotta make you feel a little good that it's like, yeah, that's like this is fucking hard.
Yes,
Really
yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. 100%. Um and then also, have you ever learned anything about yourself through your brother that surprised you? Like, have they ever said anything or like made a comment to you where you're like, "Oh, I didn't realize you viewed me that way or you thought that thing," or anything like that?
You know, I'm not really in, I guess in those terms. I think that I feel like if I had that kind of a, I never had that realization, I guess, through work. I think that my brother Brian and I feel like I've always had a pretty open sort of dialogue with each other.
Yeah.
So we'll both, you know, I'll kind of tell him that like I think you could, you know, you know, there are moments where I probably thought that he could be like pushing himself a little bit more, but I, you know, I think that, you know, he, like me at certain points in my career, he would let sort of like the fear get the best of him. And he wouldn't push himself too hard in this like one direction. And so I would just sort of feel like, man, I think you're, you know, I feel like you got so much potential here. Why aren't you going like in this direction? It just feels like you kind of just like, you know, just leaving it on the table. But I don't think anything came out as a result of like our working that he, you know, he thought, well, you know, that changed my perception of like of how I viewed him, I guess, you know, just because we both have been able to see our journeys together since we both came to Chicago together. Well, I came to Chicago with my then girlfriend, now wife, and Brian just kind of tagged along, which was totally cool. But it was one of those things where you know, had I not come out to Chicago, I don't know if he would have either.
Yeah.
And so he came out here, and we both were just sort of like building our careers together. Um, and so, you know, we've been able to sort of like see kind of like where our respective journeys kind of like led us. And, and so I feel like we've had a fairly open dialogue with each other about like
Yeah.
at various points in time. Um,
The longer we talk, the more our stories like nearly identical.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I would not have seen that, you know, just because
Yeah.
but it makes perfect sense though. It's like you
Yeah.
and Spencer are basically like working in the same industry, just like I said before, just like, you know, kind of just different shades of it. But it's, you know, my brother and I are both, you know, coming here as actors trying to like figure out how to make it work. And it is kind of crazy how parallel They are. I definitely would not have thought that, at the beginning of this conversation, but it is kind of crazy how that's kind of worked out.
Yeah. Don't tell Spencer that I told you this, but he came to Chicago because of me. So
Oh,
he
really?
wouldn't have come to Chicago. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
wild.
I started doing improv at Second City, and that's how I ended up in Chicago. And then he followed suit. He went to the college he went to because I went there, but like I got accepted there first, and then he came to Chicago because I came to Chicago first.
So you can basically take credit for his career, basically.
Like I made him who he is. Like I'm just saying, like he is who he is because of me. Like I don't know how to put it more simply.
That's so funny. Oh, I did not know that piece.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now, what time, or has there been a time? I imagine there has, but what time has occurred in your life since you've been involved in acting and theater and film, which I know we'll talk about more, where maybe you thought you needed to throw in the towel, or maybe it was just the hardest, or you were just the furthest down on yourself in terms of where you stood next to the competition or anything like that?
I feel like I've always had a little bit of hope. I think the hardest point for me that I really had a hard time understanding was after I had gotten my first co-star role on Chicago Fire. I was like super duper excited. I was like, oh shit. Cause I was like, I had just gotten it through my agent that I'd been with for about, I think I've been with her for about 3 years. The first year I was auditioning a lot and didn't get cast, and she was like, it's going to happen. They keep calling you in. That's a really, really good sign. And it was like 2023 that I finally like booked my that first gig, and I was like really excited. And I was like, oh shit, this is really great. And then I was like, yeah, I mean, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty great. And there was just, something there where I was like, I got like the high from getting the booking. And then like being on set was like it was really good, but I was also just like really tense and very anxious. And I didn't feel like I thought my self-tape that I submitted for the role was like a little bit better than what I was doing on set, because I just felt like a nervous mess. But in the comfort of my own home with my self-tape, I was like, I just felt so free and open, and I was able just to be like vulnerable. And it was a really hard like dichotomy that I was just like, fuck, am I actually really any good? Like, I know I just booked this role, but I was like, I went through this like, and I think part of it was just I was running myself ragged at that point, because I was also
That'll do it so fast.
yeah. I mean, in addition to being like a husband and a father, I was also an understudy for a play at the time. And so I was just like burning the candle at both ends. And I think that, I was so grateful to get the gig, and still am to this day. But I was just like, I thought that it would be like this just state of nirvana, this like ecstasy, that it didn't end up being that for me. And I was like, and it had nothing to do with like everybody on set was great. It was like just a really fortunate experience. But I just sort of felt like I thought this would be something that I thought would be just sort of like this major high, and it didn't end up being that. And I thought, there's something wrong here. Like I think I was thinking the work was going to be something that that it didn't end up being. And it wasn't something that I figured out until maybe like a year later, when I was taking an acting class with a really great actor here in town. And he kind of put words to what I was feeling, where he was like, I think he said something to the effect of, like, if you're looking for the work to validate you, it's not going to do that. And I was like, that's what I was dealing with. I thought it was going to validate me in this way, and it didn't. And I think my expectations were just so mismatched that I just was like, I need to take a step back here for a second, just take like a little break, and
Yes.
so that was probably the one time where I think that was the first time where I was like, I thought the work was going to make me happy, and it didn't.
And you got to be happy first.
Mm-hmm.
You got to figure out why you're not happy. It's like you wouldn't date someone and expect them to shoulder the burden of improving your life.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't expect a job to be to do all the work to make you a happier person. Art is the same way. Like
Mhm.
acting makes you happy, but if you're not happy, the role isn't going to make you happy. If something's missing there, or if you're tired, or if you're burnt out, or if you're going through some stuff, get through that stuff before expecting the role or the this goal you've set for yourself to be what makes you feel better. Because in the end, what you're going to be doing is reaching a bunch of goals and still feeling empty or tired or upset or unfulfilled in the end.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Like 100%. You just nailed it. And so that took me a little bit of time to actually figure that out. And when I found out that I wasn't like I wasn't the only one that went through that, I was like, oh, that's good. Like that made me feel like so much better that it's not
Yes.
just me. It's like I didn't lose necessarily my love for the craft. It just I had this expectation in my head that wasn't met, and it really fucked me up.
Yes. Pedestals, man.
Mm-hmm.
Putting stuff or people on pedestals, including yourself, like nothing will make you feel worse faster than when you've finally reached whatever that goal is and you're like, why don't I feel complete? Why didn't this make me better? Like why don't I feel like a superhuman right now?
Yeah.
And then you have to go through that terrible realization where it's because you didn't do the self work. You got to go back and do the work on yourself, which is awful, and nobody wants to do that.
No, it doesn't. And I've done a lot of that lately, and it's like it's been hard work, but I'm glad that I've done it because
Yeah.
definitely put even some of that in perspective as well. Like I just came away from a meeting. I had an evaluation done recently that told me that's like, yeah, it turns out you're just a really anxious person. You're not like not severe or anything that's extreme, but it's enough that you're just really like tightly wound, and to the point where like the term that they used to describe me and what I was going through was over control. So it's like
Yeah.
that's something that affected my work too, apparently.
Yes.
Like I was
Yes.
told that by the same acting teacher whose class that I took. By the way, his name's Mickey O'Sullivan. He's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
He's like easily one of the best coaches that I have in town. And one of the things that he gave me was like, I think he liked my work, but he's like, you're too controlled, man. You're too controlled. And that like made so much more sense after like I had this this told to me by a doctor. And I was like, oh, fuck. Because usually like the problems that you have in your work are the same problems that, you have in your life. And it's so fucking true, Sid.
Yes. Yes. Funny, quick Mickey story. So my brother and I get mistaken as twins a lot. And so when I first came to Chicago, we just jokingly told everyone we were twins. They're like, oh yeah, we're twins. Because people kept asking us all the time, are you guys twins? Are you guys? Yeah, we're twins. We're twins. Totally forgot to tell Mickey that was a joke. Like it just totally forgot to tell him. He must not have been in the room the second half of that discussion where we're like, just kidding, we're not twins. He's like, whatever. 8 years later, like I've been friends with this guy for like 8 years. I walk into a random Christmas party and Mickey's there. And he's like, it's Sidney Davis Jr., half of the coolest twins I know. Oh my gosh. And the whole room is like, oh my gosh, you guys are twins. And I was like, oh, Mickey, oh no. Because at first I didn't know what he was talking about because I had forgotten I had told him that lie a decade prior. Like I had completely forgotten about it, had not thought about it since then. I guess for like nearly a decade, he thought every single time he was in the room with Spencer and I that we were actually twins. He just believed it. And like looking back, he had made several comments about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just laughed it off because, we get mistaken for twins all the time. And I was just repetitively lying to him for like a decade. And I had to tell him in the middle of this party of his friends that like I was an asshole.
Man.
That I had convinced him otherwise. He like announced it. He like announced it to the room. He's like, oh, they're twins. It's cool. It's this, it's that. I was like, oh no. I am a terrible person. And I think to this day that was like the only interesting thing about me and my brother is that he thought we were twins. And so now that he knows we're not twins anymore, it's like, to hell with.
He just wrote you off completely.
Just completely.
That's
irredeemable. Yeah. I just thought you of all people would appreciate that story.
I definitely would. I love Mickey. He's like one of the best.
One of the most like positive people you'll ever just always like during during lockdown, even he was just like out there just making all this like really uplifting positive content that I still appreciate to this day.
Yeah.
Very supportive.
I love when that dude shows up in my feed. Just, oh, he's just, yeah, just to be so talented and to be so just so sweet and just so, he's just one of those artists that I've met in the city who just has a really innate understanding of the human condition, and it just can speak to it so well. And I think that's really one of his biggest strengths as both an actor and a coach.
Yes. Yeah. And that's really cool that he's doing acting teaching. I didn't know that. I didn't know he had started teaching classes. That's really cool.
Yeah, he's really good. Any of y'all, if you're looking for a good acting teacher, Mickey O'Sullivan, all the way.
All the way. So if somebody's watching this and they're like, I really want to get involved in acting or in theater, or I am already involved, but I feel very small fry, or I feel very inexperienced next to everybody that I come in contact with. And maybe they feel a little overwhelmed, right? Because you always want to put yourself in a room with bigger fish, but sometimes it's too big of a room and there's too many big fish, and you're just, you didn't mean to surround yourself with that many fish bigger than you. What would you say? What would you tell this person, or what kind of advice would you give?
That's a really good question. I would probably say a couple of things. And looking back and knowing what I know now, I would say don't be afraid of the big fish, because like they're again putting people on a pedestal. It's like they're just like the rest of us. They're just they've just also worked really hard and have worked on their craft to such a degree that their work resonated with people. But at the end of the day, it's like we're all people here.
Yeah.
We're all here in this room together, and so try not to do your best. Try not to let them get to you, and just know that nobody can do what it is that you do. Like we're all unique. Like I can't do what it is that you do, Sid, and you can't do what I do, and that's
I cannot.
that's okay. So just know that you have something to offer. So and this is something that I still struggle with at times, because and even like earlier in my career in Chicago, I would get such anxiety when I would see like other people that I have worked with that also got to do like really awesome, projects subsequently. And I would just like get fixated on it. And, it wasn't until years later that I was like, I don't know who told me this or where I figured it out, but it's like, you got to run your own race.
Yep.
You really got to run your own race. Because if you're just concerned with all the other runners around you, you're just focusing on all the wrong things. And again, it's an easy thing to say. It's much harder to put that into motion. And I still struggle from that from time to time, but that's when you really got to, just hyper focus on yourself and what it is that you want to do. And just know that you do have something to offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I would say work on the self-care piece. That's something that I neglected for a really long time.
That's so important.
Like it's
so important
to be able to do the work. Like you need to be able to. I have just gotten to a point probably within the last like few years where I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with myself, because one of the things that I remember hearing when I was in I did this protege program with Shattered Globe like a decade ago. I remember that was the first time I saw Spencer act, was in that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I think I did that maybe a couple years before he did. And the person running the program, like towards the end of my time with them, she pulled me aside and she's like, "You're not comfortable in your own skin." And it was really true. Sorry,
there's a theme here, I feel like, of women in your life telling you you've got what it takes and you just need to believe in yourself, or you just need to sit in it, or you just need to do. I feel like women in your life clock it. Because I've noticed there's this pattern of like you're the person at your high school, your soon to be wife that is now your wife, this person at Shattered Globe, it's your agent. It's all these women in your life, I feel like, that are trying to convince you. And we were even having a discussion before we were on the record where I'm like, well, here's my perspective on what you're concerned about.
And you clocked it.
Yeah, who like see right through you and just want you to see what they see.
Yeah, I think that's that you're just blowing my mind right now. Like that is 100% correct. Like I've
So far in the story, it's been all women, is all I'm
I'm
saying.
so
You haven't said a
lucky.
single man.
Like that's I guess I'm just really blessed that I just have so many amazing women in my life that, are able to, like give me the kick in the ass that I need. So, but yeah, that was one moment that I just really stuck with me. And it makes a lot of sense. And even now I think now that I've like because I've also just with the self-care piece, like I've gone into therapy to kind of like figure out why I go through these motions that I go through from time to time and why I go through these cycles. And it's been a bit of a journey, and I've learned like a lot about myself.
Oh
And also
yeah.
just like living life too has also been one that's also really helped my work a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Experience.
yeah, experience. Oh man, like there are just certain parts that like I played a role of a father last year. It was a short film. There was like a couple that was about to on the verge of a divorce, who's like they have a dog essentially that's on the verge of dying as well. And like there were a couple things that I had like this character that I was like, oh my god, like these are things that just like I have a dog, I have kids, I am married and have just like there were all these things that I was just like, oh man, I just like it just hit me so hard that had I been more focused on just like the craft and just like working and not living life, it probably would not have been as rich of an experience. But I was like, it's my first time being able to like fucking cry on a movie set. Like I was always just so like I had this like block where I just couldn't quite get myself there. And going through therapy and just living life and just having experiences that I could draw from just made it just like, oh, just like this thing where I like every part of me was just in this role. So I would probably so I know that's a really roundabout answer, but I
No,
would say
no.
between like the knowing that you're unique, not let the people in the room get to you, like we're all in this together, and just doing the work on yourself that you need to in order to like whether that's like however you build up your confidence, figure out how you can break negative cycles, and just living life. And I know it's so cliche when they say that you really do need to live life and not get consumed with the art. It is so
Yes.
so true.
Yes, well, and I think it was Ricky Gervais's wife who, when he was like, "Man, I wish I had gotten started so much earlier," because he didn't really get his break until he was in his 40s. He's like, "I wish I'd started earlier. I wish this, I wish that," and she's like, "No, you would not have been funny. You wouldn't have been the same. It was the experiences you went through in that 20 years that you wish had been 20 years you started earlier that make you good at what it is you're doing." And I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about, the introspective aspect of going to therapy and working certain things out or getting certain answers from unbiased sources and literally experiences that you go through. I'm an entirely different person than I was one calendar year ago just because of experiences. And that, as much as we hate saying to young people like, oh, just wait till you're older, truly just wait. Like, do what you got to do what you're passionate about, but also don't discount what will come to you with experience, with opportunity. The way that one of my favorite things to do right now that changed the entire trajectory of my life is storytelling. And the way that I got involved in storytelling is somebody from Second City called me and they said, "Hey, you do storytelling, right?" And I had never done storytelling. And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Great. Our headliner for this weekend dropped. Do you mind filling in for them?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I had to figure out what storytelling was because I just really wanted the gig. And 11 years later, I've taught classes, I've built curriculum. It's like my whole brand. Like I talk to people about their stories. So experiences like that can change everything about who you are as a person. And it's whether or not, one, you're willing to accept that reality that maybe some things aren't meant for you now. Maybe you need to experience certain things before you then come back and try certain things again with that knowledge. Or I don't remember if I said one or A, two or B, maybe you thought a certain thing was where you were going and an opportunity presents itself and you can either say no because I do improv, or you can say maybe we can, like, I don't have to tell anybody that I tried this just in case it goes badly, but maybe it won't go badly. Maybe there's something here. And then the next thing you know, years later, that is your whole thing. That is what people know you for. I feel like that was a tangential way of saying I agree with you.
No, but that's another good one, is that I think, to your point, that's another good bit of advice, is just kind of being open to what the universe has in store for you, and being open to new opportunities, because you never know. Like that had probably changed the course of my career as well, and probably made me a better actor, was working on the web series that you auditioned for.
I was just about to transition, into film. So you went from theater, acting live on stage, to you've been dabbling in some film lately, which I think is pretty damn cool. Tell us about that. Tell us about your film experience.
Yeah, so while I was doing theater, I would kind of dabbled a little bit in like some short films, like just as an actor mostly. And while I had my own theater company, um, back in like the early 2010s, this was like between like 2011 and like 2016. It was a theater company that called Stone Soup Theater Project, that had a really big social community outreach component to it. So we made sure that we worked with community organizers and activists, to sort of figure out like what was going on in our local communities, so that way we could kind of make our work reflect what was going on and have our work be more relevant. And so one of the projects that eventually, at one point, our artistic directors wanted to do a project that was focused on the outreach that we were doing. And a lot of that work focused on violence prevention. And they were like, you should create a project around like, around, whatever it is that we're doing, that you have an interest in. And I wanted to do violence prevention because I had formed really close relationships with violence interrupters and outreach workers, and it was one of those things where I probably would not have done had they not forced me into the position of having to create a project, because it scared the living crap out of me. Like I've never like kind of created my own project before, at least not since I was like a kid working on like my dopey movies. And so, but this was something where, since they put me in that position, it all of a sudden just sort of like, I was like, oh, I think I could probably tell this story, because again, I was forging these really close relationships and heard all of these anecdotes about, just how hard violence interruption work is here in the city. And I think there was a real misunderstanding in terms of what that work looked like, just in sort of like the broader media, because they kind of tend to look at Chicago violence as like gang on gang violence and this and that, and they really sensationalize it, but they don't show you like the nuance and what's really going
Right.
on in like a local level. And I had met like these wonderful people that were just, in a way, they were kind of traumatized themselves, because a lot of them had been swept up in, they had been in gangs in the past. Some of them were incarcerated, and a lot of them were just kind of still dealing with their own trauma. And then not only still dealing with their own trauma, but being responsible for keeping, other like at-risk individuals like off the street, and keeping them from from going down the same path they did, which was just incredibly difficult. So not only do you
Right.
have these broken people trying to do this really, really stressful job that people have a completely backwards ass view about, and I was able to sort of like gain their trust, and over a period of a couple of years, and they would tell me stories about when we would go and do these like community events together. They'd be like, yeah, I had a client that I've been working with for like a while, that had gotten shot, or I had they just didn't have the resources they need to help a lot of their clients. And they were like, what would how can you help somebody who is basically like just itching to retaliate? And really what all these were they were interpersonal beefs, they were interpersonal conflicts, and in so many other nuanced like situations that we're dealing with, where you're dealing with people who probably don't have as much access to mental health services, they don't have as much access to education, the educational services that they need. Maybe their family lives were just really chaotic, and so you have these all these these structural issues that were affecting a lot of these at-risk individuals. And it's like we do not have the structure set up to help these people, and yet they expect us to kind of put ourselves in harm's way and to do all these things when we're still trying to figure out like our own shit too. And I was like, why is that story not being told? Like
Right.
that is like, that's what people need to hear. And so I got a friend of mine named Travis Williams, who was a really good writer. He was also an actor here in Chicago. Now he's out in LA, but he's also like a really talented writer that I got hooked up with through artistic directors. And he and I just collaborated on this web series that I, kind of wanted to tell about like these violence interrupters and tell their story, because I thought it was so compelling and just like heart-wrenching what it was they had to go through. And I thought that was kind of the perfect, encapsulation of like the work that we had done. We had gotten to get to know the community, and this is what the community was going through.
Yeah.
And so I knew what I didn't know, which was a lot in terms of the filmmaking piece. So I actually went to Acting Studio Chicago because they were offering a web series development course.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was really like great timing. And so I was able to get enrolled and kind of figure out like what I needed to do in order to make the series, but also like how the storytelling, needed to be like, how do I develop my scripts? What does that look like? And so I was able to do that. And then my co-writer Travis and I spent like, I think another year putting, the touches on like our scripts. And he came up with a pilot episode that was just like, it kind of told the story in a beautiful way in terms of like, in terms of like showing the audience, not telling the audience, because it can get like, you don't want to get preachy with something like that.
Right.
You want to try to draw the audience in.
Right.
And so he was able to craft a pilot that I thought was just like, it hit the nail right on the head. And so I was able to talk with a bunch of crew members that I had worked with before as an actor on other shoots. And I was like, hey, I don't know what it is. I really, I loved your work. I loved working with you. Tell me what you think I need in order to like make this project like good. And they were like, I talked with him, like an audio mixer, and he was like, I'm really glad you asked that question. Nobody pays attention to audio. If it looks great, it doesn't matter if it sounds like shit. So we need to make sure that you do A, B, and C. And I'm like, all right, great. That's super helpful. I also got like a director of photography that Travis knew that he had worked with like on another web series. And so I had kind of leveraged all of my contacts to get these people together to help me make this pilot.
Again, experience, right? Like if you had moved to Chicago and been like, I'm making a pilot today, we're doing it. It's like, you don't have these contacts. You don't know to ask these questions. You're so focused on like, no, this is what I must do, that having waited as long as you did probably made it 1,000% better, both in the quality of the work as well as the experience overall.
Yeah, absolutely. If I try to do that straight out the gate coming into Chicago, it probably would have been a shit pilot. It would have been a not a good project, because I don't think I had anything to say, but I had something to say here because I had been around like the right people who kind of inspired the story without even realizing it. It's not that I went into, our community outreach, with our theater company thinking, oh, I'm gonna make a project out of this. It was just like, we wanted to get to know the community and try to help out and just like kind of do our part in some way. If that helped to inform the work that we did, like, great, awesome. So it was something where I just kind of, over a period of a couple of years, just kind of like discovering the story and then being positioned where I was like kind of forced to put something together that it even inspired me to be a filmmaker to begin with. So that's kind of how like the germ of the web series. It's called The Park for anybody who's interested. It's called The Park. It's at theparkwebseries.com if anybody's interested in giving it a look.
And I will link that in the show notes.
Oh, you're so sweet. But yeah, and that would just turn into an odyssey. That show, from when we started developing it to when we released the entire first season, it was a good solid 5.5 years. So it took up a huge chunk of my life, just figuring out how to put that kind of a project together, figuring out how to edit it, and and get the thing mixed with a friend of mine, and then embarking on filming the rest of the series after we put our pilot together. So it was quite a learning experience for me, and one that it was probably a little scarring at the same time because I haven't quite attempted it since, but it's something that I definitely want to get back to.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the worst questions that you're not allowed to get mad at people asking is, when's the next one? You know, when you have a kid, when you make a web series, when you do anything that takes like your life blood to make it happen, sweat, tears, sacrifice, the first thing people ask is, "Great. Are you going to like do that again, or is like another one coming? When's that coming?" And you're just like, "I'm glad you liked the first one,
Yeah.
but I'm still healing."
I
Like that was expensive.
oh, that's another thing too. That was easily, and outside of having kids, this web series was the most expensive thing I ever did in my life.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
working a day job. I was, worked for a tech company, that I was lucky at the time. I was basically working like when I was filming the remainder of our series, after the pilot had gotten released and finished. I was basically in rehearsals for a play and working a full-time job while in pre-production on the rest of the series, and it was just like it was so exhausting. And I was really lucky that if it wasn't for my brother Brian floating me alone, in addition to just putting my salary towards the production, and I was lucky I got a grant from Chicago filmmakers too to kind of help
Wow.
finish it off. Like there's no way I would have been able to put this thing together. So it definitely took a village on this one to get this series done, and it was just so stressful. I had like days where like certain actors couldn't be there, and so I had to like rewrite scenes on the fly. I had to schedule like additional shoot days that cost like additional money, and it was so stressful. And I think because knowing now that I am kind of naturally a very anxious person, we do not thrive in chaotic environments. And so I think that's like one of the reasons why it was such a trial for me, because it was like Murphy's Law. Whatever could go wrong did go wrong. And so
Wow.
I was lucky that we actually got through it with something that, the fact that the series turned out to be, like a good project at the end of the day was a miracle.
I mean, honestly, the fact that it's finished, y- you know, 90% of projects, especially in our realm, never see the light of day. Like they just don't. Like they've had money poured into them, time poured into them, teams poured into them, and for whatever reason, we never see them. So the fact that it even exists, from my perspective, having been like firsthand in that realm, massive undertaking. Massive undertaking. And then to know that it exists with, sound mixing, sound design, editors, actors, like all of these things coming together. That's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, you said it, friend. It's like it was a beast. So again, eventually I would love to get back into it, but people ask if I would do a second season. We kind of wrap things up in a way at the end that I don't know if we don't necessarily, we can just kind of let the series live like
Yeah.
as it is. And I feel like if I was, and this is a big if I was to revisit the series again, I would want to make sure we did it the same way I did the first time around, where I just spent as much time as I could just in the research phase and making sure that we were doing justice to the story, because it is such an it's a subject matter that's very easily could turn into exploitation, and I don't want to
Yes.
do that, because
Right.
it's just like you're not being a good ally as a filmmaker there. Like you're just kind of you're putting something together that has some shock value that doesn't have any true heart to it. And I think that the people who were awesome enough to let us tell their story, they deserved a lot better than that. So
Right.
I think we did a good thing here. I think we captured, in my opinion, lightning in a bottle. And so I think like we can kind of just let the series live like
Yeah.
as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've all been in the room with a project that overstayed its welcome, whether it's a television series, a play, a comedy set, something artistic where we're like, that right there would have been the perfect place to end. And there is 30 more minutes. Interesting. Or there is 10 more episodes, or there is a whole other season. Um,
Yeah.
where, like you said, sometimes it's okay to just let the story end where it ends.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
that's real life too. Like real life doesn't always give you a conclusion that is completely and totally just wrapped up like a writer had, you know,
Yeah.
something to do with it.
Yeah.
What
100%.
what did you learn about yourself through that experience? Was there anything that surprised you that you learned about you?
Yeah, that it's really How about me? Yeah, it
Or in general, if it's not about you, maybe just learned in general.
yeah, I definitely think that making sure you surround yourself with people who know more than you. That's a big one. That's the only reason why
Oh
that show
yeah.
got done is because like things were so chaotic with me. The only reason that show got done is because I had the best crew and the best creative team working on it that were able to like weather the storm with me, and I could anchor to and just really lean on them. So yeah, if you just giving advice to first time filmmakers, make sure that there are people that are in the room who know a lot more than you.
Yes. I am like literally writing that down and circling that because that's biggest life lesson I've ever learned. And that I feel like is helpful in any medium,
Yeah.
in arts, in your professional career, in like emotionally, just as a human being. I cannot be more grateful for the people that took the time and patience to teach me how to not be so ignorant about things because
Mhm.
I just happened to surround myself with people who knew more than I did about whatever it was I was sure I knew everything there was to know about.
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Yeah.
What helps keep you motivated?
Um, quality of the work. Quality of the work is a big one because I think as you are a young artist and you're kind of like figuring out your lane and what it is you like to do, there's a big temptation to want to do anything and everything to kind of get your name out there and to kind of keep yourself in sort of people's memories and people's brains. And I've done work that my heart was 100% like not into, but I felt like I kind of like just like had to do it. So it kind of showed me, oh, this kind of shows me like life really is kind of too short. And like, so this kind of shows me like what work I really, really want to do and what work I really don't want to do. So especially now that I'm older and I have more demands on me than I did when I first came to Chicago, like I'm a parent, I'm a husband, and I like my time is just more precious now because I have people that are depending on me. So if there's something that's taking me away from all that, it's really got to be good. At least in my opinion, has to be good. And there has to be some
Yes.
really redeeming things about it because it's just like my life just isn't the same anymore. So if I'm going to devote like a lot of this extra time like away and kind of put my family through a bit of like an upheaval, like there's got to be something in it for me like creatively that I just really like get excited about. And I think
Yeah.
that's probably the um yeah, I would probably say that that's like the biggest driver for me.
Yeah. Do you ever have moments where you look back on times where you thought you were busy and you're like, "What was I busy with back then in comparison to now? Like, what the hell made me think I was so busy back then?"
Yeah, absolutely. But I think for me then it kind of did feel like it was busy. So in a way, I don't necessarily fault myself for feeling that way because there were times
Right.
where I did burn the candle both ends, especially when you're like doing theater. It's like there are times when, especially in Chicago, it's like you have to have a day job in order to do like non-equity theater at night. And so that's a punishing schedule for anybody.
And then on top of that, like, unless you've been there, you cannot understand the physical drain just going places in the winter will be on you. Like, just the literal marching to the train, waiting for the train, marching to the building, taking off the boots, taking off the coat, like, just moving around
Mhm.
from November to April will zap you before you even get to the busy part.
Yeah, and God forbid if you had like, you're doing a show in the dead of winter too, where you work so hard on it and you get like, maybe one or two people in the crowd or like nobody in the crowd sometimes. Like that hasn't happened like that often where there was like zero people out there, but it did happen like,
Yeah.
maybe like once or twice. And that's also like really hard. And also just let's say you don't have a good night at rehearsal, for whatever reason, you just didn't feel like you were delivering your best work and you
Yep.
still have to go through this grind the next day of like, I just remember like when I first got to town, I was working at a Starbucks. Like there used to be a Starbucks that was right across the street from Wrigley Field, and I
Yeah.
was working opening shifts there. So I would have to get up at like 4 o'clock, maybe just before 4 o'clock every morning. And then, once I was done there, I would go home, maybe get like a little tiny nap and then go off to rehearsal. And then when you're starting to get into like the technical runs and then like the run of the show, I remember just, it was a certain level of fried that I had not experienced before in
Yes.
my life.
Yep.
And so that
Absolutely.
gets, sometimes it's hard to, but again, if you love it enough and you're hungry enough, like, you will see your way through it. But still, there are times where it's exhausting. It's really hard to be an actor when
Yes.
when that's your side hustle.
Right, right. And I think it's so refreshing to hear people who are actively working in the business say that, because I think there's people who are going to be listening to this who feel bad about feeling bad. They feel bad about feeling overwhelmed or feeling tired. They think, well, I don't have kids. Why do I feel so tired? Your experience and your feelings are 100% valid, no matter what it is that's making you feel that way. Like you said, don't feel bad about looking back on those times where you felt burnt out and you felt tired, just because things are different now, or you're even busier now or something.
Mhm.
And so we were talking earlier about how to navigate being surrounded by people who are like bigger, better, busier, paid more, booked more than you. I think one of the best things people can do is talk to those people, because I think you'll get one of two responses. You'll get some people who say, "Hey, you know what? You're doing great. I know you feel like you're not, but I promise you we all started where you're starting and you'll get there one day. It happens really fast." Or you'll get the people who say, "You want to do what I'm doing? Me? Like, you think I'm the peak of what you're trying to, that's weird." Because they're so used to looking at the bigger fish than them and the bigger fish than them. They're surrounded by so many people they look up to that it doesn't even occur to them that there's somebody behind them who would give anything to be where they are.
Mhm.
And watching that boggle their mind when that's the person you really look up to is always a very interesting experience as well.
Yeah, it really is, because I guess it just goes to show that, like, even like the most talented people, like, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. It's kind of a hard thing, because to your earlier point, when you put people on a pedestal, you kind of forget that they are human too. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
we're all part of the same rat race here. We're all
Yeah.
we're all just trying to do our thing. And
Right.
some people hit a certain success at a certain point in their lives. And I think another important piece that I thought was really important for me to learn this early on was, um, I was doing a production of Our Town that David Cromer had directed here in Chicago, that moved to an off-Broadway venue in New York.
Wow, that's
And
cool.
yeah, that was like easily one of the coolest experiences and lucky experiences I've ever had doing a project. Like, talking about, like, being surrounded by people who were just like so solid and at like the top of their game. Like, this show was it. And we were talking to a group of students. It was like a talk back after a performance one day, and David, one of the things he mentioned was, don't get consumed with the idea that you need to have success and have it young. Like, like, he was having a lot of success at that point. And I think he was probably I want to say he was in his 40s when that show came out. And he would have been toiling in Chicago for years before that. And, like, he made a real name for himself with a couple of productions, but he really tried to let people know that it is okay to have success later. Like, he's like, that is okay. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. And I think that's a really helpful lesson to have when we get into the, comparing ourselves to our contemporaries, and, like, who's doing what project and this and that. Like, it is okay to not succeed, like, right out of the gate. And in some ways, if I tried to do now what I did when I first got to Chicago, I don't know if I would have succeeded. I don't think I would have been ready for it. Like, I don't think if I had gotten cast on in a co-starring role when I first got to town, I don't think I would have been any good. I wouldn't have been ready for it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And if you think about some of your favorite older actors, do you remember them when they were young? Like, do you remember any project they did when they were young? I cannot tell you a single young June Squibb movie, but she is one of my favorite actors of all time. Cannot even tell you what she did before she was older, but as an older actor, she's one of my favorite people. I don't think I've ever seen a young Kathy Bates in my life.
Yeah.
And yet I will, if she is in a trailer, I will see that movie, right? And kind of like the Ricky Gervais story, right? It's like, what was he doing before he was 40 working in an office? Like, there's nothing wrong with the slow burn and like really finding where you belong later in life. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah.
You don't have to be 20,
Yeah, and I will say I have a conversation like this with my wife quite a bit. I'm a really hard actor to cast in certain ways.
Yeah.
I think I'm really difficult to peg because I I kind of look young, but I don't really like act young. I have like I'm kind of like I'm like short-ish, you know, so I'm not going to be playing like I don't think I'll be playing like these leading man like roles, you know. So it's and I've as I've aged, I've kind of aged into this weird kind of like gray area where
Right.
I've kind of um embraced a little bit more like of my inner sort of quirkiness, like and utilizing improv a little bit more, which is not something I did early on in my career. And it really was the park that really inspired me to do that because of the people I was working with. And so I'm just been a really I'm kind of a tough actor to like cast in something. And I still feel like as I age, I'm probably gonna age into like a certain type of role that I don't think so I think that's another, I guess, probably a roundabout way to get there is that sometimes you age into your castability.
Yes. Yes. 100%.
So,
100%.
and I
Yeah,
think
like
I'm going through that a little bit.
yeah, there are so many actors I can think of who I've ended up seeing their earlier work and I'm like, like they were okay. But then you see them when they're older and you're like oh, I was just watching one of my favorite actors. I'm trying to the gentleman from Breaking Bad. I can't believe I just spaced on his name. I was watching his show yesterday.
Oh,
Oh,
Jesus.
the dad from Malcolm in the Middle.
Yes, yes. Oh my God. I
I
don't know
can't believe
why this is spacing me right now. I'm like,
I
just like,
was literally watching Your Honor yesterday. Anyway, he's a phenomenal actor.
yes.
The most forgettable character as the dad in Malcolm in the Middle that I like. I don't remember. I remember he was funny sometimes. I do not remember anything about him in that show.
Right.
But everything I have seen him in since he's been, 50 and older, phenomenal.
Yes.
Phenomenal. Like that guy aged into exactly who he was supposed to be. And I've heard he's really good at Malcolm in the Middle. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Like I just, it just didn't stick.
And he had a killer like role in like a single episode of Seinfeld that like
Yeah.
people know him from too, where he just like I think he was like I think what he played a dentist and dentist. I don't know why my just like dad brain right now is just really failing me. I don't know why I'm not able to like
I
remember.
know.
It's just like it's like the tip of my tongue too. But yeah, again, it's like sometimes like that happens as well, and I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as artists to like succeed and to want to succeed right away. And that's honestly just not how it works. When I was
Nope.
doing Our Town, I thought it was going to go from here to like here. And then I got back to Chicago and nothing happened. Nobody gave a shit.
Nope.
And that's okay. You know, that was something that like I kind of had to go through. And one of the other actors that was in the show, it's like, yeah, it's not really like this. It's like, it's just like this. That's
Art is so, like, for lack of a better word, it is so fickle. I took a week off stand up once to move, and I saw somebody I knew, and they were like, "Oh, you still do stand up?" like that's how fast that stuff just moves on.
That's brutal.
I know. Oh, it was brutal. Yeah, you know what else was brutal was running into somebody at the grocery store in the middle of lockdown, and they introduced me as their friend who used to do comedy, and I was like, "Wow, that
Whoa,
hurt. That hurt real bad." Okay,
man.
fresh wound.
Jeez, you're friends.
I know it was my hometown. It's like, oh, this city, she used to do comedy. And I'm like, whoa, 2 months ago, relax. Like, we're all locked down here. Chill out.
Yeah,
The
really,
world is
nobody's
coming back.
working, buddy.
Right. Well, Adam, this has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like I've known you for a long time, but I really never got to like sit down and talk to you about your story and your perspective and your experience. And I've really enjoyed kind of getting to pick your brain. So thank you so much for dedicating your time, or I should say, donating your time and your perspective and your experiences to myself and my audience. This has been invaluable, and it's been such an interesting conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so grateful that you brought me on to do this. And I just, it's so funny because it's like there was so much in our little pre-conversation before we got going. That's so much that we didn't even, that we were talking about then that we didn't even get to hear. So I just feel like it's been a real genuine pleasure just to be able to do this with you and to just shoot the shit about this stuff. Cause this is the kind of stuff that I love watching interviews with actors that I respect, just watching them as human beings and being like, I'm not alone. This person feels that same way too. It's just, I love
Yeah.
watching that stuff. And it's just really, I just have a lot of gratitude for you for letting me
Thank
have
you.
that same opportunity to just kind of like talk shop for a couple couple hours.
Yeah, anytime. And for anybody listening, or if you're watching this on a visual platform, I've linked almost everything that we've talked about in the show notes. So if you want to check out Adam, if you want to check out some of the projects we've talked about, I'll even link some of the Chicago resources you mentioned, a couple of theaters and courses that you mentioned. I'll link there. I'll link some of Mickey O'Sullivan's stuff
Oh yeah,
in the show notes.
100%. I'm sure he'd love that.
Yeah, feel free to poke around and check it out and leave a comment if you liked what you saw, or send me an email, and I would love to forward your thoughts and opinions to Adam. And Adam, thanks again. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Sid. I really appreciate you too. This has been just total ball. Such a blast.